Hey, thanks for everyone who responded to the questions that I posted on Instagram. I'd love to keep doing that. I know we only have a limited time to be able to answer those. So those are quick answers, they're not complete answers. If you want longer, more complete answers to those, just let me know. I might record a whole nother video just answering those questions. But it's fun to be able to connect with you guys. This is our new normal for a while, so we'll make the best of it and we'll try to have fun along the way. When you think of the word sacrifice, what comes to mind? Think of someone who has given up a lot for you, someone who's made sacrifices. What is it that they've given up? What is it that they have put on hold in their life so that you could excel or that you could have something? Have you ever told them how much you appreciate them? I think it would be great if you could share below in the comments about someone who has sacrificed for you. You can, if you don't want to share their story, you can just share their name and just say, I'm just grateful to this person. They've sacrificed a lot for me. But if you would share their story, that would be really, really awesome. And then finally, what comes to mind when you think of the sacrificial love of God? In this week's episode of The Mandalorian, IG-11, who is this robot bounty hunter, has been reprogrammed, a nurse droid, and he takes care of Baby Yoda. He ultimately sacrifices himself for the sake of the group. They're on some kind of a cave transport that's floating in this river of lava, and at the end of the cave are some stormtroopers that are waiting there to kill them. And IG-11 calculates that there's no chance for them to escape. He sacrifices himself so that they can live. And in the episode, we see IG-11 step down into the molten lava, and he walks through and he gets to the end, and all of the stormtroopers are there waiting for him. Detonates a thermal detonator, and they all blow up, but his friends survive. John 15:13 says, "There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends." Giving up your life is the most you can do for someone. It's the most you can give. It is the ultimate sacrifice. In our last lesson, Jesus had this quiet moment with his friends, and they have this meal, and he tells them at the meal to remember the sacrifice that he was about to make. And they didn't completely get it because the sacrifice hadn't happened yet. It hadn't taken place, and so they didn't completely grasp it. So they leave dinner and they go off to this garden to pray. And Jesus asks them, I'm gonna go pray. Please stay and pray with me. But of course they don't. They fall asleep. Jesus is under such immense pressure because of what he's about to face, that it says that while he's praying, blood comes out of him like sweat, which is an actual medical condition that you're under so much stress that the capillaries inside your head burst and they come out of you like sweat. Jesus understood that he was about to face death, that he was going to be tortured. And it says that while he was praying, he actually begged the Father that if there was any way to take this from him, if there was any way for God to accomplish his plan without Jesus having to suffer on the cross, to do it that way. But ultimately, Jesus says, but not my will, but yours be done. We want to follow that example, that we can express our desires to God and say, God, I don't want to go through this. I don't want to deal with this. Like, here's how I honestly feel. But ultimately, whatever it is that you want, I know that's what's best. When Jesus is done praying, Judas arrives with guards and with a mob of people. And Judas approaches Jesus and he kisses him on the cheek, which is a traditional greeting of love and respect. We see this with Judas twice now. They were at dinner. He addresses Jesus as Rabbi. When Jesus is saying that someone's going to betray him, and he says, Rabbi, is it me? With this term of respect. And then here he gives him this kiss showing that he's respectful. And Jesus says, Judas, you would betray the Son of Man with a kiss? You come here pretending to love me, pretending to respect me, and you're stabbing me in the back in the meantime. Judas's actions illustrate Proverbs 27:6. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Often our foes or our enemies disguise themselves as friends. They go over the top to show how loyal and how great they are. But in the meantime, they're continuing to hurt us. Later, once Judas realizes that Jesus is not just going to get in trouble, he's not just going to get arrested, but he's actually going to be killed for this, he regrets what he did, and he takes the 30 pieces of silver and he goes to the authorities and tells them, look, I don't want to do this anymore, this is wrong, and they tell him what's done is done. Nothing can change this. Throws the money down on the floor, and he's so upset, so overcome with guilt that he hangs himself. Well, when the men come to try and arrest Jesus, Peter just acts out of impulse. Men come to arrest Jesus, and Peter pulls out his sword and he chops off one of the men's ears. And Jesus immediately tells him, Peter, put away your sword. If you choose to live with violence, you will die with violence. And then Jesus does this amazing thing, and he takes the guy's ear and he picks it up off the floor and he puts it back to his head and he reattaches it. These guys are coming to get him. They're coming to arrest him. And he takes time to have compassion and heals one of these men. So there's this trial, and Jesus is taken before the high priest, and he's convicted of blasphemy because he's claiming to be the Son of God, which would be blasphemy for anyone who claimed to be the Son of God if they weren't. Jesus was. At the Last Supper, Jesus had told his disciples, all of you are going to fall away on account of me. You're not going to be loyal to me. And Peter, again, being bold and just speaking from his gut, he says, look, Jesus, even if every single one of these guys ditches you, I'll never do this. And Jesus says, Peter, before this night is over, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. While Jesus is being tried, Peter is waiting outside, trying to find out what's going on. It says he's warming his hands by the fire. 3 different people approach Peter. One of them approaches him and asks him, hey, aren't you one of Jesus's men? Weren't you with this group? And he's, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea. Someone else comes up to him and they said, hey, I know you. You're one of Jesus's men. You're a Galilean. I can tell by your accent. But Peter says, I don't know what you're talking about. And then a third person approaches Peter and asks, weren't you with Jesus? Aren't you? I know that you're part of that group. Peter is livid. And he actually calls down a curse on himself. I'll be cursed if I'm lying. I don't even know the man. Immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered what Jesus said. And it says he went out and wept bitterly. So Jesus is brought before Pontius Pilate, who's the Roman governor, of their area. And they bring him before him and say, we want to crucify Jesus. And he examines him and says, he hasn't done anything wrong. Like, this is not my business. You guys need to take care of it. So he sends him to Herod Antipas, who was the local Jewish ruler. Herod looks at him and examines him and says, nah, this is not an issue for me. Like, we're not going to kill this guy. But he says, you guys call him King of the Jews, right? This is the King of the Jews. So let's put a robe on him. And so they find a fancy robe and they put it on him in a mocking fashion. And he sends him back to Pilate. Jesus appears before Pilate, and Pilate's like, oh, I can't believe you guys want to kill this guy. Like, I can't find anything wrong that he's done. So Pilate can't find anything wrong with Jesus. We'll flog him, or we'll scourge him, we'll set him free. The people say, no, we want him crucified. So he comes up with a plan, and he says, look, I'm going to release to you either Jesus, the one who you're calling King of the Jews, or the murderer Barabbas. And they say, set Barabbas free, crucify Jesus. So Pilate infamously washes his hands in front of everybody and says, I wash my hands of this. I'm not guilty of this man's blood. This is on you. So they scourge him. They whip him. It would have been probably several long strands of leather, could be 2 to 3 feet long. And then they would attach like bits of bone, balls of lead, to give it some weight so that it came down with weight. And also so that it wouldn't just hit the skin, but that it would pierce the skin, that it would actually dig in. These floggings were so severe that some people didn't even survive them. Historically, it's agreed that the Romans gave Jesus 39 lashes because supposedly 40 lashes was enough to kill a person. So in an effort to show mercy, they would give you 39 lashes. It would have torn his back into shreds. It would have ripped chunks of skin and flesh out of his back. It was extremely painful, put you near death. Then they put his robe back on him. The guards made a crown out of thorns. They took like thorny branches and they weaved them together and made a crown and put that on his head. And then they gave him like some kind of a reed stick and said that it was his scepter. And they all like bowed down before him and said, oh, King of the Jews, in a mocking fashion. And then it says that they took the stick from him and they whacked his head and they pounded this crown of thorns into his skull. They spit on him and they slapped him. Prophesy, like you know the future. Tell us, who's hitting you? Who's spitting on you? And then as Jesus was being led to be crucified, and he had to carry his cross with him, before they did that, they would have ripped the robe back off of his back. By this time, it's probably started to stick to his back because of the blood, and it would have torn his back up again. The way that they set up crucifixion is most likely that the vertical post would have already been in place, and they would have had to carry the horizontal post. They would have to carry that from the place of judgment to where they were going to be crucified. Jesus is weak from his beating. He would have lost a lot of blood. He's been up all night. I mean, he was up the day before. They had dinner. He prayed all night, and they came and got him in the middle of the night. He's exhausted. He has to carry this heavy beam all the way up this hill. The place is called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And they would have assembled the cross, attached Jesus, probably tied him to the cross, and then they would have taken large stakes. Some people think maybe 2/3 of an inch, wide. Even though traditionally, we see the holes going in his hands, there's probably too much weight for the whole body to hold here. There's nothing to hold it together, so it's more likely that it was here in the wrist where you've got some strong bones. And they would have put the stake in his hand, and when they hit it, it would have tore through all these nerves. It would have shot just pain all the way up his arms each time that they hit the nail. And then they would have put his feet on top of each other, and they would put another stake right through those bones, right through the middle of his feet, and it would have gone through and attached itself to the wood. The wood of the cross would have been rough on Jesus's back. His back is already sore and torn up, and that rough wood would have scratched up and irritated his already torn up back. And then as they put him in place, they put a sign above his head that says, King of the Jews. And while Jesus hung there on the cross, guards are down below and they're gambling for his cloak. Who's gonna win this prize? People yelled at him from the cross. This guy could save other people. Why doesn't he save himself? He says he's the Son of God. He can surely get himself down off the cross. Save yourself. If you really are the Son of God, get yourself off the cross, and then we'll believe in you. Then we'll know that you're real. And all this time, instead of being angry, instead of yelling at them, instead of screaming at them, instead of getting down from the cross like he had the ability to do, the Bible says that Jesus prays to the Father and says, Father, forgive them. They don't understand what they're doing. Crucifixion usually took a really long time. It was a slow, painful way to die. When you're hanging like this and your whole weight is being pulled down, it's hard to take good breaths. So in order to take a good breath, you would have had to push off of your feet and pull up with their arms so they could take a deep breath. And every single time they did this, the pain would just shoot through their legs and through their arms, and it would be so immensely painful just to take a good breath. Eventually, they would die of asphyxiation where they couldn't get oxygen. There was no honor this kind of death. It was extremely painful, humiliating, degrading. And yet Jesus was willing. He knew this. He knew this was going to happen. This is why he was under so much strain when he was praying. He knew that he was going to face this kind of suffering. But he was willing to do it because he loves you and me, because he loved humanity. He was willing to be that final sacrifice for our sin. Now, all this time, all throughout the history of the Israelites, they sacrificed an innocent animal, and that it was supposed to hurt. It was supposed to be painful. It was supposed to have a cost. This innocent thing has to pay the price for my sin, for our sin. And Jesus was willing to be that final sacrifice for our sin so that we could be reunited with God. Our relationship could be mended and fixed. Jesus was willing to accept our sin on him and pay that final price for us. And when the weight of all of our sin was placed on Jesus' shoulders, he felt this separation from the Father that he'd never felt before. See, Jesus is God. He is united with God, but at this moment, he had taken on the sins of the world, and there was this distance, there was this separation. And the Bible says that Jesus cried out, my God, why have you abandoned me?" At this moment, Jesus felt that separation from the Father. Can you imagine feeling abandoned in your darkest moment by the one person that you are closest to? Imagine how that felt for Jesus to feel alone on that cross. And then Jesus says two last things. He says, "It is finished." Meaning his job here was done. He'd accomplished the goal that he was set out to do. And then it says that he looked up into the heavens and said, "Father, into your hands I entrust my spirit." And he let go of his life. This is the most pivotal story in human existence. It shows the depth of Jesus' love for you and for me and for each and every person who's ever existed. In the same way that I think it's important that when we have a day to celebrate, like Memorial Day, it's not enough just to have a day off, but we should take time to remember those who gave up their life in the service of this country. When we have Martin Luther King Day, we want to remember the sacrifice that he experienced, the things that he gave up, the way he was willing to put his life on the line. That's why we take those days off, is to remember those people, to remember those things, because they're important. And I think it's so important for us to understand the depth of what Jesus went through, that his sacrifice, it wasn't cheap, it wasn't easy, it was difficult. And he suffered a great deal. And I want to understand that, because it will make me examine myself when I choose to sin. It will make me examine myself when I've made mistakes. It will make me examine myself when I've hurt him. But it will also fill me with joy, understanding the price that's been paid for me. This is an incredible gift that Jesus has given me. So may you understand that you're a sinner. But may you also understand that Jesus sacrificed his life on the cross for you. And may you understand how incredibly Jesus loves you. Well, next week is Passion Week. It's when we look at the final week of Jesus' life, his entry into Jerusalem, his final supper with his disciples, his crucifixion, his burial, his death, and his resurrection. So next Wednesday, we're going to look at Jesus' resurrection. This is the greatest event in the history of the universe. Without the resurrection, Jesus' death is just a really sad story. But because of the resurrection, there's hope in Jesus' death. We'll look forward to that next week. I love you guys, but remember that Christ loves you even more. We'll see you next week.